Hey guys, we're going to quickly cover something called the 1% rule. It was kind of an age-old investment way to determine if it was a good deal, right? So obviously we've grown, we've sophisticated, we've improved how we calculate our return on investment, but it's just a general rule of thumb. And in some markets they still use this, and in other markets they might even use a 2% rule, right? But the idea behind the 1% rule was that 1% of your total investment would equate to cash flow, would equate to a cash flow in assets, buying the whole property, right? So what that means is if you have a property that is worth, or you're into it for $150,000, the rent should be $1,500, okay? So what happens in the 1% rule, and while we kind of like the lower end of the spectrum when it comes to rental properties, is that the rent doesn't generally keep up with the value of the property, right? So if we're starting down here, and this is your rent amount, right? And this is your value. What will happen is your value is going to come along in a line with your rent, right? So let's say value 60K, 80K, 90K, 130, 140, 160, 180, 200, you know, all the way up to 50, 300, 350. These are the value of the property, right? Your rent on this lower end of the spectrum is going to remain pretty in line with the value, right? So $600 rent, $800, $900, $1,300, starting to creep up, $1,400. Now when you get up to about here, it's going to start being lower than the value, right? So your rent does not follow the same trajectory as the value of these properties. So it's going to kind of tail off like this. So when you get to about that 180, you're looking at, you know, 1,550 or 1,600. At 200, you're at, you know, let's say 1,600. And then it's going to go up to, you know, 2,000 over here. So you're losing your 1%. So what does that mean, right? It means that when you are all in for, let's say, 130, and your rent is 1,300, you're still cash flowing because you're paying debt on 130, right? Your PITI, your principal, interest, tax, and insurance. Now, if your purchase and all your investment is lower, then your PITI is going to be lower, so your rent, the majority of that is going to cover with enough overage, right? With enough cash flow left over. Now, when you're buying a $300,000 house and your rent is only $2,000, what does that mean? It means your PITI is much higher, but your rental income is not keeping in line. So that means your spread, right, is going to be a lot less. So here our spread is $300 to $400 a month. When you get to this figure, it's going to be less, right? 0 or even negative to, let's say, 150, right? So a lot of it is dependent on what market you're in. If you are in an appreciation market, somewhere that doesn't have that has an urban boundary, there's not a lot of room for growth, San Francisco, New York, Seattle, we know those prices are really driven up. We know that the average price is $500,000. Well, your average rent is not $500,000. So you're investing into the fact that property historically appreciates, right? So if you are buying it for $500,000, you're okay not to have the rental income, the cash flow, because you know in a year or 2 years' time that might be worth $600,000, $650,000. So we love the rental side of things. We love the lower end. We love them when they're sticking close to the value, to the rent. Why is that? It's a little bit less volatile. Okay, if we have another 2008, what's going to happen? These prices are going to trend downwards, right? And even these prices will trend downwards. But what stays pretty consistent is that people need a roof over their head. if what we expect after the COVID period, there's a lot of foreclosures, there's a lot of inventory, a lot of people have to sell their houses quickly. They're going to be losing their properties, but they have to live somewhere. So what is it going to do? It's going to turn them into a renter, right? So, you know, it's more stable if you have that bank instead of banking on the appreciation, and the market crashes, then your value becomes less than what your note is, your principal and interest on when you bought the house, right? So now, one thing on the 1% rule is we can still use this to our advantage when we are calculating a deal. So what are you doing when you're looking for a good investment property and you're running your numbers to figure out what you're making your offer on? You're running two sets of comps. You're running ARV comps and you're running rental comps, right? Now, our market is Houston. Houston is a very big market. We have high-end homes, the $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 homes, but we also have the $70,000 to $150,000 homes that we really like as rental properties. Now, to get your comps, you're going to run both of these, what the value of the property is and what the rental is. Now, in some of these lower end markets, the 70, 80, 90,000, your C-class, your D-class markets, there's not a lot of home ownership. There's just not people buying the houses to own them at 70, 80, 90, 100, $150,000 because they're renters. So what does that lead to? It leads to a ton of rental comps, but maybe not a ton of ARV comps. So instead of just giving up and saying, well, I can't find any ARV comps, there's no way to offer, we're going to implement the 1% rule to derive our offer. We know that we'll have investors buy it because they can see the potential of the cash flow. So we are going to use 1% to calculate our offer. So scenario here, we find a property, we're running ARV, we can't find it. So next we switch over to the rentals, but we see a bunch of rentals at $100 or $1,100, right? Rental comps. So what I'm going to do is I am going to use that 1% to come up with a value of 110,000. Okay? Because it's 1%. 1% of the total value. So now I have my ARV. So 110,000, now I'm going to go through my normal scenario of coming up with my offer. So let's say on this one the repair was $38,000. We're selling this for $47,800, and our initial offer to the homeowner or the realtor is $35,800. So really practice that. You will see, especially in our market and some of the lower end markets or the affordable housing markets, you're going to be able to see that there's not a lot of true ARV comps, but there's a lot of rentals. Don't give up on that. Use the 1% to be able to determine what your value is.